It's no secret that the Toronto Blue Jays have a logjam in the middle of their infield, and by all accounts, by all reports, it looks that Santiago Espinal is going to be the odd man out heading into the season. We don't know where he's going to land. We don't know who's going to land him, but we'll break down some potential trades and much more in this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. Now, it's no secret that Santiago Espinal is kind of going to be the odd man out heading into the season. Whether he's on the roster or whether he's not on the roster, he figures to not get too much playing time, barring any injuries. So he didn't have a great season last year. Obviously, he was an all-star in the first half of the 2022 season. So he really showed some flashes over there of potentially being the guy going forward for the Blue Jays. But it's sporadic playing time, inconsistent play with the bat, and inconsistent defensively, which is something that you could always count on for Espinal. He's kind of found his way out of this lineup consistently, and now the way Kevin Biggio swung it towards the end of last year, the emergence of Davis Schneider, there just isn't much room for him. So the Blue Jays have been looking to shop him. We don't know what his value is. We don't know if he could fetch you anything of value in return for your big league club, but we do know is that the Blue Jays are looking to shop him. I'm looking to make the immediate club better, and Espinal's not helping with that.
Yeah, an interesting report came out highlighting what a potential package could look like. But before we get into it, a quick reminder, hit the subscribe button. About 70% of you guys who are watching are not subscribed. Now, Peter, this one is interesting. I'm just going to get right into the article. It says, those would be of interest. Basically highlights Jorge Polanco as a potential swap regarding Santiago Espinal here. And the initial report says it's no secret the front office is actively exploring infielder Espinal's trade market, and according to multiple sources, has increased those efforts since acquiring Isaiah Kiner-Falefa last month, not last night. And as such, it's possible that future discussions could center around Richards, Garcia, Espinal, paired with a AAA prospect. So we get, for the first time, some sort of source regarding what a potential package could look like, and that kind of flows into this, where looking at some players in return, it could be Jorge Polanco. It could be Austin Slater, a pair of right-handed batters. We discussed Slater in a previous video. Lane Thomas is a guy we discussed last offseason. And I have a potential mock trade I'll throw up in a second. But Peter, what are your thoughts on this, potentially pairing Espinal with one of our, bullpen guys, maybe Garcia on his last year of the contract, and then maybe a guy like Spencer Horwitz on a who's also getting logjam, kind of pairing your logjam guys to get someone who can make more of an impact next year?
I don't know if that even equates to the value that Jorge Polanco would give you. I think Polanco's a great player, got good power, switch hitter, can play multiple positions. He's got a lot more versatility and a lot more value than Espinal does, and I think it would take more. And we look at those names, the AAA prospects, Otto Lopez, Addison Barger, Spencer Horwitz, Leo Jimenez, Paul Maggiani. I mean, the only guys that I could see maybe being of an enticing nature to those teams would be Addison Barger or Damiano Palmigiani. I can't see teams knocking on the door for Spencer Horwitz or Otto Lopez. Their ceiling is not very high. So I look at a trade package of Espinal plus a prospect. It would have to be one of your top 8 to 5 guys if you want to get someone like Polanco, because he is a big-time player, and he is someone that would alleviate a lot of issues for this Blue Jays lineup, and Espinal just doesn't do that. The Twins are still a good team. Like, I understand that they want to shed some payroll, and they lost Mitch Garver, so they're not going to be as competitive as they were last year, but they shouldn't be looking to offload. They should look to make swaps and maybe shed some payroll and make their team just as good as it was, but I don't know if an Espinal for Polanco swap does that for them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and you kind of mentioned it. According to, again, this is not a necessarily super accurate all the time, has Polanco's value at around 10, and then Espinal and Horwitz at around 3.7. So I agree with you in the sense of it does make sense, obviously, for the Jays, and if the Twins do want to shed salary, you suspect they could get some sort of contract elsewhere that might be a little bit better. But if you do include a guy, whether it is Berger or Palmigiani, those are two guys that could be very, especially Palmigiani. I don't know if the Jays want to give up a guy like Addison Barger, who's on the cusp of the major leagues, whether it's this year or the year after. But Palmigiani's a bit of an older prospect. He's been mashing in the minors, and that would make a bit more sense, maybe Espinal and Palmigiani. But then I'll ask you the question, is that a deal you would do, Espinal, Palmigiani for Jorge Polanco? Would you do a deal like that? Because Polanco is a very solid, kind of a power hitting to a degree, 14 home runs, but he is a second baseman and fill that need very well for the Blue Jays and kind of be a big middle of the order bat.
Yeah, I would do that. I would do that in a heartbeat. And I don't know what I was saying before. Mitch Garver was not on the Minnesota Twins last year. He was on the Rangers and he signed with the Mariners. I don't know. I feel like the Twins lost somebody, and their mandate was to shed some payroll because there's a lot of uncertainty with the Bally Sports contract,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's happening anymore in the AL Central and even in the NL Central for that regard. So there's a lot of uncertainty concerning payroll for teams that are in contracts with Bally. So I could see why they're looking to offload a little bit. But yeah, I would do that deal in a heartbeat, Nick. Espinal and Palmigiani for Jorge Polanco. That makes your team so much better if you're the Blue Jays. And Palmigiani's a good prospect. I think he will be a future major leaguer. He's got that kind of upside, but it's a similar situation for him. There's a logjam ahead of him. There's a Relvis Martinez and Addison Barger, and those guys, you've heavily invested into those guys if you're the Blue Jays front office. So you're going to give them a lot more leeway than you would Damiano Palmigiani. Even though he is Canadian, I just don't know if his ceiling is as high as those two that we just mentioned. So it could be tough for him to break through, and could be a win-win if the Twins see something in Damiano Palmigiani.
Yeah, it gets very interesting when you look at kind of Espinal's career with the Blue Jays. 2021, great. 2022, not so great. Obviously, he had his little all-star stint last year. Bad, and you look at the plate appearances, they were cut in half last season. And then we also have Kevin Biggio suspects to get, I mean, assuming we don't make a move, I guess he's our starting second baseman. You can make an argument for Davis Schneider. But, Peter, what do the Jays do with all of these AAA prospects that are logjam and aren't really necessarily good enough yet, specifically Otto Lopez, Spencer Horwitz, even Leo Jimenez, to make an impact? I think you have to move them. And the question is, who do you go for? Because we have so many prospects. It's to the point where even our top prospects are logjam to a degree going forward, aside from the pitching ones. That's the biggest question here. I think that is why Ross Atkins would have no problem shopping around a lot of these guys, but their value isn't super high either. So they're in a very, very interesting spot. You can't just keep them down forever.
At a certain point, you got to know what you have in these guys, and you got to know whether or not they're ready by putting them at the major league level. I mean, Spencer Horwitz came up and he did a fine job playing some first base, DHing every now and then. He looked okay. He seems like he could be a big leaguer. Otto Lopez, in a few stints, he looked like he can hit at the big league level, and he didn't look overmatched. Addison Barger and Relvis Martinez, these are two of your top prospects. You haven't even given them a sniff at the major leagues. You got to give them a shot and see what you have before you close the door on either one of their futures. So I don't like the way that the Blue Jays have handled their prospects over the past few years. Like, you got to give these guys some playing time, and you got to give them some at-bats. Look at all the other successful teams that we're seeing. I mean, the Texas Rangers won the World Series last year. They had no problem calling up their top prospect, Evan Carter, and he was one of their best players in a postseason run. Now, I'm not saying the Jays have an Evan Carter in their system, but they do have a Ricky Tiedemann. They do have an Aurelvis Martinez, who are top 100 prospects. Give them a shot. See what you got in those guys. The Houston Astros are famous for doing that, bringing up rookies and them just shining right as soon as they hit the ground running in the major leagues. So see what you have in these guys before you close the door on them. And I just don't like the idea of keeping them in AAA and not wanting to expose them to the big league level. There comes a time when you got to let your prospects play, and I think this is the time now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them to play with. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on a trade centered around Espinal, Polanco, and which one of these prospects, I know a lot of Jays fans, and us included, want to keep Addison Burgess. I don't think he would necessarily be included, but someone of that nature. If you want to check out a video from yesterday, click on your screen now, and we'll see you tomorrow.